Hello everyone! Today I'm going to discuss Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen and its 2007 ITV adaptation. Originally I was just going to talk about the film, but then I decided to reread the book to refresh my memory on what that was like, and now I have a lot more to say. To begin, I'll share some of my thoughts on the book. Northanger Abbey was written in 1803, but published in 1817 after Jane Austen's death. It's different from her other novels in that it is primarily a satire of trendy Gothic literature. It tends to be a bit divisive. Some readers really like it, and others do not. Others consider it one of her inferior works. The story centers around Catherine Morland, a naive girl from a large country family who is obsessed with reading popular Gothic novels. She's invited by an older childless couple to come along on their trip to Bath, and there she's introduced to two different families, the Tilneys and the Thorpes. She quickly develops a partiality for Mr. Henry Tilney, and is delighted when his father invites her to come stay with them at their home, Northanger Abbey, which she fancies to be a place brimming with mystery and secrets. I read this book a few times in my teens, and for years I have told anyone who asks that I actually really like Northanger Abbey. If I were ranking Jane Austen novels, I wouldn't put it at the top. Pride and Prejudice, Persuasion, and Emma shuffle around for first, second, and third place, but I enjoy it a lot. So it's quite a surprise to me that this time I didn't have as much fun with it as I anticipated. Maybe it's just a matter of poor timing. Maybe I wasn't in the mood for this kind of thing right now. I don't know. It is a relatively short book, yet it took me an awfully long time to get through it. There were sections I found tedious. It wasn't as amusing as I remembered. I didn't like Henry Tilney as much as I used to, and I just wasn't feeling Jane Austen's snarky criticism of all her characters. The protagonist, Catherine Morland, is kind of silly, but I like her anyway. She's a good-natured, modest girl with no ego who struggles to fathom how disingenuous some people can be. She's not an especially dynamic heroine, but she grows a lot, makes the right decisions eventually, and sticks up for what is right. So I get a little miffed sometimes when Austen takes shots at her. A lot of the first half has to do with Catherine wanting to become better acquainted with the Tilneys and being stymied by the intervention of her worldly new friend Isabella Thorpe and her brother John. I cannot stand either of these manipulative characters. They are despicable people, and as a teenager who sympathized to a certain extent with Catherine's struggle against peer pressure and passive-aggressive bullying, and maybe not having the best judgment when it came to picking new friends, I wanted to hurl the book across the room every time I read it. Now, it does occur to me that the subject matter here is kind of trivial. So much is given to Catherine wanting to go for a walk with the Tilneys and not being able to, and taking forever to recognize that certain people are awful when it is abundantly clear to the reader from the get-go. And when you consider all of this and how much attention is given to it, and that there's not really any attention given to anything else, you might find yourself thinking, is this all this book is about? There aren't really any villains here, just people guilty of unladylike or ungentlemanlike conduct, which in the Regency world is a really bad thing, and should be a really bad thing in our world as well, but standards have changed. Well, let's not get off on that tangent. Isabella is a typical Austen bad girl, John Thorpe is a jerk, Captain Tilney's a jerk, General Tilney is an oppressive, shallow bore, and proof that good breeding does not necessarily a good man make. See also Sir Walter Elliot and a half-dozen other Austen characters. On the flip side, we have the Tilney siblings, Henry and Eleanor, but mostly Henry, who is a good guy. He's humorous and kind and forgiving, and he likes Catherine from the start. But The way he's amused by her ignorance and overactive imagination and takes it upon himself to educate her and open her eyes, I don't know. For the first time in my life, I read this book and was like, he's kind of condescending. Austen often uses him as her mouthpiece, so Henry says a lot of outrageous things loaded with irony that confuse his listeners who are not clever enough to get what he's really saying or catch on to the fact that he's making fun of them. In fiction, that kind of thing is entertaining. In real life, I find it kind of obnoxious and rude. Someone who says the kind of things that he says, I would probably say, oh, doesn't he think that he's the smartest person in the room? And he loves to hear himself talk. But let me reiterate, I did not think this when I read the book years ago. This was a new thing, and it did not last the duration of the book. Henry redeems himself in my eyes later when he catches Catherine about to do something stupid. He handles the situation very smoothly. He gently admonishes her, knowing that she's mortified, and then goes out of his way to reconcile and restore their relationship. So that's nice, and he is a good guy, and I'm totally okay with them ending up together. So don't get me wrong, I haven't had a complete reversal here. I did enjoy the book still. I wasn't miserable reading it. And there's no denying Austen's talent. Her prose is as witty and sharp as ever, and in this case, it wasn't as important to her to tell a complex narrative as it was to poke fun at Gothic novels and the people who read them, and also the people who make fun of the people who read them. In the second part of the book, Austen gets to have her cake and eat it too. If you're familiar with Gothic tropes, whether you like them or not, this aspect of the novel should be quite entertaining, especially Chapter 6, where Austen eases us into a flawless imitation of the very novels she's been mocking. Okay, I have now spent more time talking about the book than I intended, so we're gonna switch gears and talk about the film now. And let me pause to issue a slight spoiler warning. If you haven't read the book or seen the movie and you would like to, and you don't want to know too much about anything, proceed with caution. There are only two major Northanger Abbey adaptations I'm aware of, the 1987 BBC one starring Catherine Schlesinger and Peter Firth, and this 2007 ITV one that stars Felicity Jones and J.J. Feild. Years ago, I saw a few minutes of the 87 one. It didn't do much for me, and since most people don't like it, I don't have much interest in watching the whole thing. The 2007 one I saw when it debuted on public television in 2008 as part of a Jane Austen series, and I liked it a lot. We all did. My mom, my sister, my friends at school who hopped on the period drama bandwagon with me. We had many enthusiastic discussions in study hall about which heroes we liked best, who we would marry, etc. Henry Tilney always rated pretty highly, mainly because J.J. Field's portrayal was so very charming. I'm 99% sure that I was already familiar with the book when I saw the movie, so I recognized the changes. But for the most part, they didn't bother me at the time. They bother me a little more now, but bear in mind, I watched this literally 2 hours after finishing the book, and that is hardly fair. The fact that it makes a number of changes comes as no surprise once you find out that the screenplay was adapted by Andrew Davies, who has written a great many wonderful costume dramas, but who also has a reputation for taking liberties with the classics and making them a little sexier whenever possible. Admittedly, I am a massive hypocrite when it comes to this issue, because sometimes I am perfectly fine with his changes and additions and I embrace them, and other times I object to them. It is very much a case-by-case basis kind of thing. A lot of it depends on just how far in a certain direction Davies goes. There are a few things here that Austen did not write and perhaps never would have written, so Davies being behind this is a plus and a minus. He has a knack for making literature come alive, broadening its appeal for modern audiences, and writing smart, sassy, period-appropriate dialogue and interesting scenes that make romantic hearts go pitter-patter. But when you watch an adaptation of his, you should be aware that what you're about to see may be quite different from its source material. This film, directed by John Jones, is under 90 minutes long, even shorter without the censored bathtub scene, which is not in my version, and it speeds things up a lot. The storytelling is condensed, not severely. You don't feel like you're getting whiplash watching it, but it moves at a quick pace. And that's probably to make room for all the new, more romantic material. There are several lurid fantasy sequences added where Catherine plays a terrified but excited victim, and the men she encounters in real life play various roles, most of them sinister. Davies also added several romantic touches, most famously the proposal and kiss scene at the end. Of course, Austen didn't write anything like that. Her novels are famously minimalistic when it comes to that kind of thing, because, contrary to the common misconception, they are not romance novels. So, purists, understandably, object to love scenes, sex scenes, and overly demonstrative PDA in Austen adaptations. I do too, sometimes, but this scene is awfully cute and fun, so I always give it a pass. So the story and the dialogue are condensed, but the drama is dialed up. Everything is on steroids. Characters' reactions, bath culture, where every place is insanely crowded and the men all act like wolves, the extent of Isabella's crime against her fiancé, the way the general kicks Catherine out. It's like they looked at everything in the book and said, okay, but how can we make it more extreme? The performances are all spot on, though, and they did a fine job with casting. These British costume dramas are often a good place to find budding stars, and here we've got a couple big ones. Catherine is played by Felicity Jones, who is now an Academy Award-nominated actress for The Theory of Everything, and known in mainstream circles as Jyn Erso in Rogue One. I think she makes a perfect Catherine, hitting the right notes at every stage of the character's development. J.J. Feild plays Henry Tilney. I suppose he's not as widely known by people who don't watch costume dramas like this. He was everywhere for a time. He doesn't seem to have broken into the mainstream circuit. Well, he's been in a couple of things. The biggest Hollywood movie I know he was in was Austenland, where he was great as a Mr. Darcy parody. His Henry Tilney is a lively, pleasant person, way more smiley than most Austen heroes tend to be, and the antithesis of the brooding, Byronic type. Feild uses his face a lot. That sounds weird. He exchanges many sly or amused looks with Catherine. They are both expressive and have lovely chemistry. They just twinkle at each other a lot, and it's very charming. Co-starring as the insufferable Isabella is Carey Mulligan. She's a bona fide movie star now, twice nominated for Best Actress and appearing in one big film per year. Her portrayal of Isabella is maddening, but that's the way the character is supposed to be. Despite Mulligan being 2 years younger than Jones, the fact that she's taller and dressed with more sophistication makes her seem older and more knowledgeable about the world. At least more knowledgeable about some things. And Liam Cunningham plays General Tilney. I do think he hams it up a bit, but I'm not sure what an actor is supposed to do with that character. He's all flattery one second, and an overbearing parent the next, and it's he's a strange character. As for other featured characters, John Thorpe is a creep, Captain Tilney is irritating, he's so smirky, and Eleanor is probably the most wholesome character in the whole thing. Consequently, she's a little dull, but she's easy to like. Now, I did something I don't usually do because it feels awfully nitpicky. As I was watching the movie and taking my notes, I wrote down every change, addition, omission, rearrangement of details, what have you, that I felt Jane Austen or an avid fan of the novel would raise an eyebrow at. And next to it, I put a big fat X. And let me tell you, by the end of the movie, I ended up with a whole lot of X's. Some of these changes are not that big a deal, like John having his eye on Catherine before his sister is introduced to her, Mrs. Tilney's portrait still hanging in her chamber instead of in Eleanor's room, Henry catching Catherine already inside the mother's room instead of outside it. Some of the changes generate more drama, like Henry leaving after chewing Catherine out rather than still being there to show there are no hard feelings. This way, he is absent for 2 turning points, and Catherine is in despair right up to the end, thinking that he's still angry with her. Another change to up the drama is that General Tilney kicks Catherine out in the night rather than sending her off at 7 in the morning. This makes her journey home more alarming. It also makes him seem like more of a monster, but it doesn't really hurt anything. But there are other changes I had some beef with, for one reason or another, things that made me say, why did they have to do that? For instance, it's John Thorpe who puts the idea of a skeleton in the Tilney family closet in Catherine's head, rather than her foolishly inventing it herself. We're in on the fabrication about Catherine's presumptive inheritance early on, rather than it being left as a reveal at the end. Instead of Isabella just flirting shamelessly with Captain Tilney, Davies takes it to another level by having them hook up, and then Captain Tilney's like, I'm not gonna marry you. For one thing, this scene does make the adaptation a little less family-friendly. For another, I'm not sure that it's something that Austen was implying. Could she have been implying that this happened? Maybe. There's a precedent for it. She has things like this happen in, other books, but I doubt it. The way people discuss it, I just get the feeling that we're supposed to believe it's bad enough that Isabella was being unfaithful in spirit. If she had also been unfaithful in deed, I think that there would have been a lot more outrage. One thing I really disliked this time was that Henry partly justifies Catherine's suspicions about his father and mother. This got a big what from me, because the whole point is that Catherine got this notion that something nefarious happened from all the books she's read, and just ran away with it, not considering that the facts don't support the theory, and she's doing injury to the man she loves. By having Henry say, well, actually, you're kind of right, I don't know, it doesn't sit well with me. The adaptation also cuts out any reconciliation between Henry and the General. Catherine and Henry just get married without his consent, and we see General Tilney fuming on the grounds of Northanger Abbey. And that's not how it goes in the book. It's not the end of the world, and maybe they felt they had made him too mean to deserve such an outcome. But the book's ending has more finality on that point, whereas the movie made me ask, so now what? Are they never going to talk to him again? Because that's not really something I want to root for. So, as a romance, a romantic comedy, a Regency costume drama, the movie's fun. It's even delightful. As an adaptation, well, it's kind of doing its own thing sometimes. Just because it's not 100% faithful, though, doesn't make it a travesty. The characters are pretty much spot on, and the story for the most part is intact. But there are many little changes, and depending on how much you care about that, this film may or may not be for you. I do like the film, though, as long as I don't dwell too long on certain aspects. Those are my thoughts on Northanger Abbey. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear any thoughts that you have on the book or the adaptation or both, so please feel free to share those in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.